Hi, my name's Patrick Carruth, President and Headmaster of the Bear Creek School. I'd like to welcome you to Tools for Success. Tools for Success is a partnership between the school and our parents to help you in raising your students. We do a lot in the building with education, and you do a lot at home with education and raising your children. So we want to partner with you in that. So thanks for joining us at Tools for Success. I hope the content that we provide you is useful for you as you raise up children in the way that they should go. I'd also like to encourage you to be on the lookout throughout the year for other events like Tools for Success put on by the Bear Creek School to partner with you to help your student become the individual God intends.
Good evening, all. Thank you so much for joining us tonight for Tools for Success, the recipe for success in middle school. We have some fantastic content ahead of us, and I'm really excited to learn from our speakers. But before I do that, let me start off with a brief introduction, some prayer, and then some logistics as well. My name is Katie Gummel-Kywitz. I work in the admissions office at the Bear Creek School. I know some of you very well as I've journeyed with you through this application process, and some of you I don't know yet, but I'm excited to spend this time with you, albeit virtually. My role for the evening will be a sort of MC, helping introduce our speakers, facilitate some Q&A as well. And then at the end, after the event is finished, I will stay on to share some about our admissions process for families that are interested in learning about Bear Creek. So that'll be my role tonight. Before I talk about some logistics, I'd love to open us in prayer. So please bow your heads and pray with me. Dear Lord, I thank you so much for this evening. I thank you for the opportunity we have to come together in fellowship. I pray that you would give our speakers wisdom as they share with us all, as educators, as parents, and as students as well. Lord, this time of middle school is such a special time of growth for students. And I just pray that we would all learn tonight and that we would grow together in wisdom. Amen. Before I introduce our first speaker, Amy, I would like to let you all know that there will be time later in the event for some Q&A. You will see on your screen that there is a side panel where you can put questions in. I would encourage you to do that throughout the entire talk. We will collect the questions throughout both speakers, and then at the end there'll be time for Q&A. But don't wait until Q&A to put your questions in, as we'll start filtering through those as the speakers are sharing with you. So at any point, please start putting those questions into the Q&A box. With that said, I would love to now introduce our first speaker, Amy Fowler. Amy started teaching at the Bear Creek School in 1999. She loves teaching because of the impact on students and seeing them grow academically, socially, and spiritually throughout their 6th grade year as they strive towards the goals they have set. She holds a BA in elementary education from Western Washington University and an MS in brain research from Nova Southeastern University. And I will turn it over to you, Amy.
Thank you so much, Katie. Well, everyone, I'm so glad you could join us this evening for this seminar on the recipe for success in middle school. It's an honor to be able to share with you some of the things that we've learned through our experience as teachers and also as a parent. Well, I got to start out by making a confession. I am not a very good cook. So being that the title of this has to do with a recipe was kind of ironic to me, because sometimes when I follow a recipe, it just doesn't turn out the way that I wanted it to. And so I just want to start out by acknowledging that the recipe we're going to share with you tonight is not really a formula, because learning and development is complex. And so what we want to do tonight is give you some tips and ideas just to help fuel the process of growth in the middle school years. So we really hope you find it valuable and useful. So on this little recipe, the words show some of the topics that we're going to be talking about tonight. And so it gives you a little overview of what you can expect. And as you look at those words, independence, ownership, self-advocacy, initiative, metacognition, self-confidence, organization and time management, and study skills. I want you to think about what's your goal this evening during this seminar that we're having together. What do you hope to learn? So whether you're a parent or a student joining us, I think there's something for everyone, and I hope it's an encouragement to you. But I would love for you to just take a moment and reflect in your mind what you hope to get out of the seminar this evening, or maybe jot it down if you have something to write with, or if you are a parent and a student listening to this together, just turn and tell the person what your goal is or what you hope to get out of this. So I'll just pause here for a moment. All right, well, whenever I meet someone new and they ask me what I do, I'll tell them I'm a teacher, and they often just smile and say, "Oh, that's so sweet." And then they usually ask, "What grade do you teach?" And I tell them, "Oh, 6th grade, I'm a 6th grade teacher." And their response is almost always the same. Their face kind of falls, and then very often they say, "Oh, I'm sorry," as if it's something bad to be a 6th grade teacher. And I think that the middle school stage of life comes with a little bit of a bad reputation because it's the time of adolescence. There are so many changes that are happening, but it really doesn't have to be viewed this way. So I want to challenge the thinking that the middle school years are just a stage to endure and get through. And recognize that it's a time of incredible growth of a person becoming a mature adult, and it is such an important phase of life. So I just want to review the phases that we see children go through in school, especially in the lower school and middle school years. So in school, we see growth in different phases of thinking. And in the lower school years, up through about 4th grade, students are gathering knowledge and gaining skills, and they'll look to the teacher for information about what is true and what's important knowledge for them to gain, what skills they should have and how they can gain those skills. And parents can see this at home too, as children look to their parents for the truth of the world around them. Well, as students enter the middle school years, there's a shift in thinking. Now, when instructed about the world around them, the students may question or challenge it. And this is actually natural and healthy because it's a part of their development. So they're really ready to question, defend, argue. And we have a word for this shift from the grammar stage into the next stage of learning, and that's the dialectic stage of learning. And that happens when students are in middle school. So I like to think of a garden because gardens need a lot of tender nurturing and care for them to be healthy and grow and thrive. And so that's kind of similar to the work we're doing in middle school. The plants are growing and they're going to be full grown eventually, but along the way, they need to be tended to and cared for. And that's what we do for our students as we're working with them as they move through these stages of adolescence. So let me give you just some main ideas of what you might see in the dialectic stage of learning. There's still a desire to have facts and gain knowledge about content area, just like in the lower school years. But we start to see students who want to think and reason beyond the facts that are presented. They start to take ownership for their own learning through the questioning of ideas. And sometimes new information doesn't quite fit into the boxes that the previous information held. And so there's this tension in the learning. And this tension that the middle school student feels is a good thing because it leads to the processing of ideas and it leads to depth of thought. So along with that, in the middle school years, you'll see deeper discussions, and students will present varying viewpoints and raise questions that are difficult to answer, but they love to do this. And you see them sort of awaken and be alert when there's a discussion on a controversial topic where they get to justify their viewpoint using reasoning, so that their mind in middle school is just eager to think through arguments and justifications. So I'm a parent myself, and when my son was in middle school, I saw this change firsthand. You know, as a parent, you're kind of used to just telling your child, this is how it is, and this is what we think is right and wise. And then eventually they get their own ideas about how things should be. And so when my son was, I don't know, he was around 7th or 8th grade, and he had gotten some money. I think it was a birthday, so he had a large amount of money and he wanted to spend it on a video game controller. And we just said, no, that's not a wise use of your money. So sorry, no, just save it. And we thought that we were helping him and the conversation was over. So he just sort of went away for a bit and came back later in the day with a typed 5-paragraph persuasive essay. And, you know, he wasn't a student who really liked writing, so this was actually pretty amazing. And in the essay, he laid out his 3 clear reasons why it was fair and just for us as his parents to allow him to choose to spend his money on this video game controller. So in this, I could see he had sound reasoning and he made a good case for himself. And I think we did end up letting him get the controller after all. Well, at Bear Creek, we talk a lot about growing in character by learning about virtue and practicing it. We grow by learning about what character is and putting it into practice. And in a similar way, we help the students grow in intellectual virtues. And these are the traits of a good mind. So some examples of intellectual virtues are curiosity, reflectiveness, paying attention to detail. And I've picked these 3 traits that I think are specific to middle school. These are some traits that students in middle school are learning and practicing. And the first one is patience, or you could say perseverance. So in the middle school years, the content is often more complex or abstract, and sometimes it doesn't click immediately as the students are trying to learn content or skills, and they can get pretty frustrated with themselves if they don't understand something right away. And so one of the things that we teach in the middle school years is that learning actually is a lot of work, and it does take time, and it takes patience, it takes study, and it takes repetition. And so we encourage the students to be patient with themselves and allow themselves to take the time needed to learn something new. And the second trait is flexible thinking. In middle school, when the students are learning new ideas, we teach them to have their thinking be flexible, because sometimes the new ideas add to their previous knowledge in a surprising way or an unexpected way, and it can be hard to accept the new information. I'll give you an example. So when in math, we do a lot of work with positive and negative integers. And so when I teach my students that subtracting a number is actually the same thing as adding the opposite of a number, it can be hard for them sometimes to accept this because they're just so used to subtraction. So thinking about it in a new or different way doesn't always fit right away in their mind. And so there's some tension, and that's okay. It takes patience and being willing to have flexible thinking. And then finally, intellectual courage. This idea is to take risks, to grow as a learner, and also to be okay with admitting when you don't know something. So a student who has intellectual courage might get out of his or her comfort zone to try something new. Maybe they try new strategies as a writer. Maybe they work on a new style of art, even though they aren't sure if it's going to be good or not. Maybe they're going to defend a position that they have in front of the class. And also, a student with intellectual courage could say to themselves or to others, I don't know that yet, or I don't understand that fully. So when we think about learning something new, this summer I experienced it myself, and I realized it's really good to remember what it feels like to learn something new. It's not easy, and it really does challenge you. So this summer, my family decided to do some golfing. And so I had golfed way back when, but never really learned it properly. And so I was set out to do the correct golf swing, but it just felt wrong. I had an incorrect golf swing. And when I tried to do it the way that was supposedly the right way, it just felt funny. And I kept saying, this doesn't feel right. And the response would be, well, that doesn't mean it's not right, because you're doing it right. You're just not used to it yet. And it just made me think about how often in the classroom, the new content sometimes doesn't feel comfortable for the students right away. And the process can feel hard. And our brain is actually really working to make meaning and to accept new ideas and to grow in new skills. So I think it's a good reminder for our students here that are joining us tonight that just because something is hard doesn't mean that you're doing something wrong or that something is wrong with you. Learning can be just very difficult and hard. And that's why it's also rewarding when we get it. I'm still working on my golf swing though, so. All right, well, let's talk about the steps toward becoming independent as a learner, as a student. Our goal as parents and as teachers is to help children grow in independence. And this is really a process. It doesn't happen overnight. C.S. Lewis says, we feed children in order that they may soon be able to feed themselves. We teach them in order that they may soon not need our teaching. So my son got his driver's license over the summer, and I don't know if any of you parents have ever had a child drive for the first time, but if you have, then you know that feeling when they first get behind the wheel of the car. I know what I was thinking. I was like, this is just my kid. He is not ready to do this. And I just wasn't sure if he was ready to actually be a driver. But it caused me to think about the time in the car together over the years. So it's been 16 years of life, and a lot of that life has been in a car together, and it has been in phases. When he was a newborn, he was in this car seat facing the back of the car with a 5-point harness. And for him to go anywhere, we had to buckle him in ourselves. He couldn't do it by himself. And eventually he progressed to the next car seat and then the booster seat. And each time we were so glad to, move on to the next level of car seat. And I still remember when he was finally allowed to ride in the passenger seat and what fun it was for him to be able to be up front in the car. And then of course he moved to the driver's seat and now he's driving himself places and I'm not even in the car with him. So this is an analogy, of course, you've probably figured it out, that the growth from dependence to independence is a process. It's slow and it comes in steps. And, you might think like, if you could just picture me trying to buckle my 15-year-old son into a car seat in the back of our car, that would be absurd because he's too old for that. And so it's kind of like in school, we always want to find the right balance for our kids as parents in what they need as far as how much independence are they ready for in their academics and in other ways too. So, we don't want to hold their hand for too long, and we also don't want to let go too early. So it's really about finding the right balance. So as we see students moving toward independence, we encourage it. It's a good thing. But we also recognize that students still need the support of teachers and parents and need to rely on the wisdom of adults as they're going through this growth toward independence. So around 5th or 6th grade, it's really common for students at that age to want to take more independence of their work if they haven't already. Parents can take a more hands-off approach when it comes to the planning of the work, the execution of the work, knowing the test dates and how to prepare for the test, and move toward a more supportive role with just encouragement and being prepared to offer wisdom and guidance as it's needed. So to the parents here, I know that sometimes it's hard as we are thinking about our children moving toward being more independent because we don't want them to fail. And we might look at them and think, I don't know if they're ready. I remember when my son was in 5th grade and I was teaching 6th grade, so I knew what was coming and I kept thinking, I don't know if he's going to be ready. You're just not sure as a parent, but it goes back to the analogy of my son learning to drive a car. If I had just kept saying, I don't know if you're quite ready, I don't know if you can do it, then he's going to start thinking, oh, my mom doesn't think that I can handle driving, so I must not really be ready for it. And so he's in danger of believing that he's not capable. And then he would be in the passenger seat forever. And so in school, what we found is that when we allow the students to take that independence and take that step and try to, manage their own schoolwork or work their way through a problem or an obstacle in their learning, sometimes they fail at it. And that's okay, because it's a time of learning and growth. Of course, we could step in and tell them, well, here's what you should do, because we're adults and we've already gone through the process of learning and growing, but they need to go through the process to learn those important skills. And also it gives them a feeling of accomplishment when they work through something that is challenging, but they see, oh, I could handle that. I was able to do that. So I want to share a quote with you from a student when she was in 9th grade. She said, "My parents have supported me for as long as I can remember, but in middle school, they started to let go of my hand a bit like the teachers did. They were still always there, but they let me take the wheel a bit more. They helped me with my work and were there during my troubles, but they let me come to them, not them to me." All right, so let's move into talking about the idea of ownership. It's part of becoming more independent. As students become more independent, they take ownership for their own learning. And in the middle school years, the teachers work hard to help the students develop this important mindset, because we want the students to be the ones in the driver's seat, driving their own learning. So first of all, being an advocate for your learning. So this skill, to be an advocate for your learning, requires practice, and it's not a skill that middle school students are always comfortable with. So in the middle school years, we teach the students to approach the teacher, themselves with their questions about their learning, about their grades, about their concerns. And I do want to acknowledge that, especially if you're a student here with us tonight, that we know as your teachers that can be really hard sometimes, and it's difficult to approach your teacher. It does take a lot of courage, but it is important to be able to ask for help. And the truth is that students who are persistent in continuing to ask questions until they understand really are more successful as learners. So sometimes students worry that they're being a bother to the teacher if they ask for help or ask questions, like they're they're interrupting the teacher from, whatever else the teacher is doing. But students, that's what we're there for. We want to help you. We want to answer your questions, and we want to support your learning. So please don't feel like it's not allowed to ask this or that. We definitely encourage it. So when it comes to asking questions, I just want to take a moment to really focus on asking questions of your teachers. So some of the things I'm going to talk about right now are going to be really directed toward the students who are with us tonight. One of the misconceptions that I have sometimes seen in the classroom is that if you have to ask questions, it must mean you aren't smart, or it must mean, that you missed something. And that's really a misconception. It's actually just the opposite. Asking questions shows mental strength. So one of the students, another 9th grader, said, "One way that I grew in middle school was my communication skills with my teachers. At the beginning of middle school, I was sometimes scared to ask my teachers questions, but you just have to. Now I am super comfortable to talk to my teachers because of my experience in middle school." And then another 9th grader, when she was in 9th grade, said, "Asking for help isn't a sign of weakness, but it is actually the opposite. Asking for help is a sign of being proactive and responsible. Your teachers want you to ask for help so that they can help you understand what you don't know." So I love that some of our upper school students just put this so well. So there's another benefit to asking for help, and it is that when you form your thoughts into words, it actually helps with the comprehension of ideas. So there's this phrase, saying leads to seeing. Okay, saying leads to seeing. And this comes from author John Piper. And he wrote a book about this, and I just love it, how when you see something beautiful, if you use words to describe it, you understand that thing even more because you have put it into words. So when we put things into words, it actually helps us to understand it better. So students, if you've ever raised your hand to ask a teacher a question, and your teacher comes over to your desk and you might say something like, "So I do this, and then I do this, and then I do that." And then the teacher says, "Yep." So all you've done is just summarized and repeated back to the teacher exactly what he or she just told you, but you are helping your brain understand that idea by saying it out loud. So it is a wonderful thing to do, and you can do that even when you're by yourself. I used to joke about teaching my stuffed animals. I had all these stuffed animals, and I would like line them up sometimes, and you could tell I was going to be a teacher because I would like line them up and teach them in my room. But just saying things out loud, if you're learning a new concept, it doesn't have to be a live object. You can teach anything, but saying it out loud is what will help you understand it better. Also for the students here tonight, I would really like you to avoid saying, "I don't get it," because that's really a statement of giving up. You might not get it. And so I'm sure you're just being honest if you've ever said that. But I think that a better strategy is to start with a question somewhere. And so start at the beginning of where you first got confused and ask a question. So you could even say something like, "Well, how did you know to start by doing this?" If it was maybe a math problem or something like that. So I have a challenge for the students here tonight, and that is in the next week. So before Thanksgiving break, I want you to ask your teacher with a question that will help you grow as a student. So maybe you can jot this down, or maybe you want to think about it some more later, but what can you ask a teacher this week? So I have some ideas for you, and I'll read these ideas off to you, but you could come up with your own idea too. So you might ask, "Can you explain why points were deducted here?" Okay, so if you're looking over returned work and you don't understand why you missed points, that would be a great thing that would help you in your learning. Or, "I thought I was ready for this test, but I wasn't. Can you help me understand how I can prepare for the next test?" Or here's what I'm thinking of doing for the project. Do my plans meet your expectations of what I should do? Okay, if you're not sure, you know, if it's what the teacher's expecting, that's a good way to ask that. I noticed I often get low scores in, and I just put grammar. You could fill in the blank with anything. Do you have any ideas that would help me improve? Or if I spend 2 hours on this assignment, does that sound about right? Should I spend more time or less time? Or I want to become a better writer, or you fill in the blank with your thing. But I often don't know what to say. Do you have any ways you can help me think of what to write? All right, so hopefully you can think of a question that you can ask a teacher this week, and maybe I'll let all the middle school teachers know that a lot of questions might be coming their way. Let's go ahead and move on and talk about another part of taking ownership for your learning, which is to be an active learner. One of the most powerful ways that you can take ownership for your learning is to be what we call an active learner, and the opposing side of that is called a passive learner. So I'm going to have you look at this picture and tell me which one of these pictures is a better picture of how people learn. So one is the sponge in the bowl, which is the often the analogy used for learning, right? Soaking up the information. And the other one is a person putting a cup in the water to fill it up. So I would like to tell you that the better picture is the person putting the cup in the water to fill it up, because the person is doing something to put the water in the container rather than just sitting there and letting it happen. So let's compare and contrast a passive learner and an active learner. And if you're a student here tonight, you can think about which category you find yourself in most often and how you want to grow. So I would say overall, a passive learner sits in class and just kind of waits for wisdom and knowledge and understanding to kind of just drop into their brain. But an active learner is doing this mental work. They're thinking constantly during class. So a passive learner might come to class unprepared, maybe without the materials needed, where an active learner is going to think ahead about the materials needed and come prepared. A passive learner, their physical posture might indicate that they're tired or they're just kind of waiting for time to pass. Whereas an active learner's physical posture indicates their readiness to learn. A passive learner values just getting their work done. Okay, when they're doing work, the main thing they're thinking about is getting it done, being done. Whereas an active learner values the learning process and the understanding of the purpose or the intention of the work. A passive learner might respond to, say, a question with the very first thing that pops into their mind, whereas an active learner is going to respond with the very best thing that comes to mind. So there's a little bit of patience there. A passive learner waits to see what will happen next, whereas an active learner makes predictions about what will happen next. And then finally, I mean, there's more we could add to this, but from my list tonight, a passive learner, the lessons seem just isolated from one another. Like today we're doing this lesson on this topic, and we're going to start and we're going to finish, and then I'm going to move on. But an active learner sees that there are connections between their learning today and their previous learning. So students, I want you to look at these descriptors and think about what type of learner you are, or maybe what phrases under active learning would you like to work on and grow in. So maybe you can just take a moment to think of that, and then we'll move on. All right. And again, these slides will be coming your way by email. So if we are going too fast, but let's move on to the topic of metacognition, which is really closely connected to this idea of active learning. So active learners are metacognitive, and metacognition is thinking about your thinking. So what this means is that the student monitors his or her own thinking and learning. So you could think of them as driving their brain. So they're driving their own thinking. So I'm going to give some examples of this. Metacognitive students recognize when their mind starts to wander, which happens. You know, if you're sitting in class, your mind starts to wander, but then they do something purposeful to refocus. And sometimes all it is telling yourself to refocus. And maybe it's getting a drink of water or knowing that you need to take a break. Another example is that metacognitive students think about the strategies that are the most helpful for them as learners. So they think about how they learn best and what they've done in the past that can work and continue to do those learning strategies. Also, during class, metacognitive students think about what they're doing and why they're doing it. So it's really good to always have these two questions in mind. What am I learning and why am I learning this? So that you're connecting it to other knowledge. Also, if you're a metacognitive student, you will recognize when there's a misunderstanding and then take the time to correct your thinking. So the good news is metacognition can be taught and practiced. So I have some practical things you can do to grow as a metacognitive student. And the first one is, it sounds kind of funny, in the orange pie slice here, let your mind get bored. So there is some research that shows that our most reflective thinking happens when our brain is bored. So what I mean by bored is there's no distractions, no screens, no constant input, but maybe just sitting in quiet or doing something rote. Your brain will kind of kick into this reflective mode and start to goal set and how you can get better at things, how you want to grow, how you want to improve. And a great book about this is called Bored and Brilliant that I really recommend for the parents. My most reflective thoughts come when I'm driving because it's just a rote thing, or when I'm folding laundry, I don't have to really think about what I'm doing. So it kind of just goes, my brain goes into this reflective mode. Okay, in the gray pie, make connections to what you already know. So always try to make connections to what you learned in the last lesson or what you learned in the previous year or what you learned in another setting and how it connects to what you're doing in the moment in the class that you're in. And like I said before, think about what you're learning and why you're learning it so that you always know, why is this important? Why does this help me? How does this fit in with the bigger picture? And then in the blue pie, it says practice thinking aloud. So it's really good to just say in words, even out loud, what you're doing or what you want to do. So you could do this, for example, when you're solving a math problem, you might even say, okay, first I need to do this, then I need to do that. Or if you're confused during reading, you can sort of talk out loud about what's going on in your book. And then another thing you can practice to grow as a metacognitive thinker is to self-reflect on your learning. So when you get papers back from a teacher, look them over, think about the score, think about anything you might have missed or misunderstood. And also notice what strategies worked well. If you do really well on a test, think back to what you did to prepare for that test, because you're going to want to do that again if it worked for you. All right, so the next slide has some ideas that I think are really creative ideas that you could try. So I want you to just look at these ideas and see which one connects to you and your style, and maybe it's something you'd like to try in one of your classes coming up. Okay, so sorry if I'm moving too quickly. It's hard to tell. Let's move on to the idea of problem solving. So as a student taking ownership for your learning, you will want to work to overcome obstacles to your learning by problem solving. When there is any problem that's stopping your progression in learning, the students themselves can learn to figure out ways to solve their problems by coming up with reasonable solutions. And so a couple examples. So maybe a student is at school and they need a book, but they left it at home. So to say, oh, I left my book at home, so I can't really do anything, isn't necessarily going to be a good solution to that problem. But I left my book at home. Can I go check one out at the library? Can I see if they have one at the library? Or can I share with my neighbor? Might be a good solution to the problem. Or, oh, I didn't have that paper, so I couldn't do my homework. Instead, find a solution that's going to move you forward. Like, oh, maybe you have someone you can reach out to and they could send you a picture and you could just do the work on notebook paper instead. So sometimes as adults, we too quickly rush in to try to fix these problems for the students. And so at school, we try to encourage students to find ways to solve these kinds of little problems on their own because they're capable of it, and they also grow in problem solving skills and also in confidence. I love this quote from Love and Logic. Self-confidence is achieved through struggle and achievement, not through someone telling you that you are number one. Self-confidence is not developed when kids are robbed of the opportunity to discover that they can indeed solve their own problems with caring adult guidance. So this leads me into just my last little message for you this evening, and that is about the parent's role. So parents often are wondering, what should my role be? And you might have noticed I have not exactly told you, do this, don't do this. It's very much find the right balance. You know, are they ready for the front seat? Are they ready to move to the driver's seat? And sometimes, you know, they might be in the driver's seat, but need to move back a little bit to the passenger seat. So it's always just keeping an awareness of how your middle schooler is doing and what kind of support is going to help them versus hinder them. So a phrase that we like to throw around at Bear Creek is support as little as possible, as much as needed. So you really want to let go with some of the things you can let go on, but we don't want to leave the students completely on their own. Also, to the parents, I just think it's great to allow for failure when your child is problem solving. So sometimes as they're trying to solve the problems, you might have a better solution, but if they work through it and kind of learn the hard way, then the lesson sticks and it can be really powerful. All right, well, let's go ahead. Oh, I have some ideas for parents. So there's some questions that you could ask your middle school students on the next slide. So when you think about how to engage after school with your middle school student, the one at the very bottom should probably be at the very top. Do you want a snack? So once they have a snack, when do you find yourself most interested in school? Kind of capturing on their strengths and interests. Was today successful in school? Why or why not? What was the most important thing you learned today? What still confuses you? What do you want to know more about? When do you feel proud of yourself in school? Is there anything you want to start doing differently? And then when they're stuck, well, what have you tried already? What do you think you should try next? That's letting them solve their own problems. And then, just offering to be someone that can quiz them on anything that they're trying to memorize. All right, well, I hope that there was something helpful or useful that could be put into practice from some of those ideas, and I will turn it back over to Katie.
Thank you so much, Amy. I really appreciate that. There's so much great content that you shared, and every time I listen to you speak, I learn something new. I know I mentioned to you before that I've heard you use the car analogy once before, and I love that idea of, starting with the car seat, strapping the kid in, but then eventually you're gonna have to let him drive. And so thank you for sharing that as well as many other things with us. I want to remind everyone on the call, there is still time to submit your questions for Q&A. So please feel free to continue dropping them into that question box, which should be on the right-hand side of your screen. We'll get to those, but before we do, I'd like to introduce our second speaker of the evening, Grace Carruth. Grace Carruth is a Bear Creek alumni, and she joined the faculty in 2019 and teaches middle school drama. She is passionate about cultivating an appreciation for the gift of creativity and of theater. And as a Bear Creek graduate, Grace brings a unique understanding of the school's mission. She holds a BA in theater from Whitworth University, and we're very excited to have her share with us tonight. So Grace, I'll turn it over to you.
All righty. Well, thank you so much, Katie, and thank you, Amy, for that wonderful beginning talk. I'm going to try and build off of some of the things that we're already talking about success in middle school. And I want to start with a question for you all. So what do Elijah of the Bible, Snickers, and middle school success all have to do with each other? Maybe this is not a question you were anticipating being asked tonight, but we're going to unpack it together. So 1 Kings 19 describes how after fleeing from Queen Jezebel, who wanted to kill him, the prophet Elijah collapses in the wilderness and he laments to God that he wishes he was dead. Now, God could do any number of miraculous things in this moment, but what he chooses to do is something very simple and very tangible. He sends an angel to give Elijah a snack and tell him to take a nap. So this is what the text says. All at once, an angel touched him and said, "Get up and eat." He looked around, and there by his head was some bread baked over hot coals and a jar of water. He ate and drank and then lay down again. Now, I love this story. I like to call it God's "You're Not You When You're Hungry" moment, calling to mind the Snickers advertising campaign where people are given candy to help them be less hangry. God sees to Elijah's basic physical needs, food and rest. He takes care of him, and then he sets him back to the spiritual and political work that he was doing. Now, I love this story because I think it shows that God knows how we need to be taken care of. And I think that's a really good jumping off point to talk about success in middle school. So last time I gave this talk, I encouraged us to start thinking of organization and time management, not as yet another thing to stress about, but as a form of taking care of ourselves. So let's jump and talk about that. Organization as self-care. So when I think of a self-care day, I think about cozy blankets, I think about candles, I think about a warm drink, and I think about my favorite period drama. So take a second and think about what your self-care day would look like. Maybe it's spending time out with friends, maybe it's playing hours of video games. Whatever it is, we're taking time in our week to relax and to reset ourselves. But really, every day should include some form of self-care, and it doesn't have to involve candles. Self-care can look like giving yourself time in the morning to eat breakfast. Self-care can look like going for a walk before you start your homework. And self-care can look like finding an organizational system that works for you. The kind of system that will give you peace of mind and will allow you to sort out your priorities. So let's talk about some of those systems. If you've ever attended a concert or a show at Bear Creek, you'll likely have seen students singing or playing an instrument or acting their hearts out. But what you probably don't see is the detailed systems in place behind the performance. So spreadsheets of light and sound cues for theater, storage closets full of sheet music for choir, and seating maps for band. They're all designed to give you the best possible experience. If these systems aren't in place, the show can't go on. There's a great scene in one of my favorite movies, Mission Impossible: Rogue Nation, where the spies are trying to stop an assassination at the Vienna State Opera during a show. And the assassins kill the stage managers and lightboard operators as they try to get a good shot at their target. It's very dramatic. The scene escalates in tension as Ethan Hunt fights the assassins in the flyloft, all while trying not to be detected as the opera continues below them. And it's a really fun scene, but it always makes me smile and shake my head as a theater person, because in real life that would not happen. If the stage manager and the board operators were taken out, the show would come to a grinding halt. That's how important and interconnected the systems of a performance are. They allow for the creative performance to shine because they're well constructed in the background. So what systems can you, as a student or as a parent, put in place to help your academic performance at Bear Creek shine just like a performance? The answer is what works well for you. And so now we have to unpack that. In grades 5 and 6, students are given planners. And in grades 7 and 8, they are encouraged to purchase their own. And in grades 7 and 8, students have the opportunity to learn about executive function, kind of like this, weekly during office hours. And then they're allowed to put it into practice right away, starting on their homework or starting planning their week. So I want to talk a little bit about planners and planning in general. So planner use is something that can be super personal to you. And planner makers have a panoply of options for you to choose from. There are full month spreads, there are weekly spreads, there are blank spreads, daily spreads, everywhere in between. For one person, it might work really well to write assignments on the day that they're given. And for another, it might work to write them down on the day that they're due. Here's some other ideas for your planners. You can take them or leave them, whatever works well for you. You can color code your classes. This may help you to determine whether science or English is going to take up most of your time. And this is especially helpful, I think, if you know that one subject is easier for you than another. So maybe a night full of Latin and history assignments is way harder for you than a night of algebra assignments. And color coding can put your workload into perspective. Instead of a block of text, you're seeing, oh, okay, well, it's actually just a few algebra assignments. I'm good. If color sounds too complicated, and I know for some people it definitely does, you can try using symbols. Either symbols for classes or symbols for types of assignments. So an example could be maybe you use an exclamation point for assignments that you know are going to take you a while, and you use a little dot for small daily assignments that you know you can knock out in one night. But for some people, color and symbols is still too visually overwhelming, and plain black and white ink is a lot easier to process. And if that's you, it may not be in your best interest to try and make your planner fancy, even if your peers are doing it. And I know that in middle school, there's a great culture around making fancy planners, but remember that organization is your self-care and your tool. It's not a social trend to keep up with. Another tool you might find useful is to break your workload down into 3 categories: to do, in progress, and done. This is a system you could implement in your planner, you could implement it in a bullet journal, you could implement it with sticky notes on a wall or on a whiteboard, which is what I like to do. Every task you have, you start in your to-do section, and then you move it to in progress as you work on it. And finally, you get to put it in the done section as you are done with them. And this not only shows you what you need to accomplish, but it shows you what you've already accomplished and gives you that little confidence boost, instant gratification kind of thing. So parents, I encourage you to partner with your students to find a system that works for them and equips them with the most confidence, even if it isn't the system that you would use. Just bear in mind that a single piece of paper that's been shoved haphazardly into a backpack is probably not the best plan. So let's talk a little bit about routines and rhythm. Over and over in middle school, you're probably going to hear the phrase predictable and supportive. And this is what our teachers want to be for students. We want to be predictable and supportive. And in order to cultivate a community that is that way, we have to establish routines and rhythms for our day. So in the same way that a dancer or an athlete or a writer sets themselves up for success by maintaining those purposeful routines, you can take ownership of your learning process in the same way. Start with your space. I once had an acting mentor who told me that how we enter our rehearsal space sets the tone for the entire rehearsal, and she was super intentional about this. So she would make us set our bags and our phones outside the rehearsal space. We couldn't touch them, and we would quietly enter the room, and we would bring only what we needed to bring: our script, our water bottle, and an open mind. And sometimes it did feel a little silly to treat that linoleum-lined studio so solemnly, but we were able to get so much good work done simply because of the routine we established and the way that we approached our space. So what does that look like for a student? Well, first, it means doing a little bit of self-assessment. How do you work best? I work best in a quiet room. I like to have some coffee on hand, and some of you may be the same way. So in order to work best, you need to find some space in your house away from distraction, away from your siblings or pets or music or the television. But some of you may work best when you actually do have someone there to hold you accountable or to bounce ideas off of. Whatever it is, make a clean and comfortable space that is your own. So now it's time to begin your routine. You've got your space. Let's talk about the routine. At the middle school level, students begin this transition into self-driven task initiation. Younger students might have needed a parent or a teacher to tell them it's time to do your work now and keep them on track. But older students are learning to cultivate the skill of starting on their own. So set a goal to make your education your own and take pride in your process as well as your finished product. So students, I encourage you to take pride and ownership of the whole process. In your planning stage, prioritize the work that needs to be done first. Knock out the smaller daily assignments like your math problems or your required reading and annotating, but take time to work on larger assignments too, even if they're not due the next day, like essays or tests that will take more than one night. Spend 10 minutes a night on an essay for a week instead of 2 hours cramming it the night before and getting no sleep. One of those is definitely preferred. So you've cultivated your space, you've begun your work. You could put your nose to the grindstone for 3 hours and only emerge for dinner and for bedtime. But having a good work ethic does not mean driving yourself into the ground. I think it's important to realize that. Give yourself brain breaks as you work. Get that snack, go for that walk, listen to that song that's been stuck in your head all day. Part of really good time management is knowing when not to be working. Taking care of yourself as you work allows your brain to refresh and to reset and to dive back into your tasks with even more focus and clarity. I mean, of course, if you find that you get into a really good zone on a task and you don't want to break your concentration, you can do that too. And taking a 2-minute break after every math problem you do probably isn't the best strategy, but taking a 5-minute break after 20 minutes of math might be. Our faculty policy in middle school is not to give students more than about 20 minutes of homework per subject per night, maximum. And we meet regularly to ensure that the calendar isn't super overloaded. So students, if you do feel overloaded, I'm going to encourage you to advocate for yourselves on a personal level. Send a polite email, get an office hours pass to meet in person. Your teachers want to help you make your workload manageable. Believe it or not, we don't want you to spend your entire evening doing homework. We want you to play that video game. We want you to watch that movie with your siblings. We want you to text that friend and have dinner with your family. And most of all, we want you to sleep. So let's talk about sleep, one of my very favorite things in the whole world. It's been said so often that it's a little trite, but it's not any less true that sleep is one of the absolute essentials of human function. Sleep boosts your immune system, it boosts your mood and your memory, and it gives you a myriad of other benefits. There's tons, I couldn't possibly list them all here. And studies consistently show that not getting enough sleep is actually really quite dangerous for your body, and that being super sleep deprived impairs your judgment as badly as being intoxicated. Poor sleep impacts your mental and physical health, causes you to be more stressed, more anxious, shorter tempered, maybe you're falling asleep in class. If you're working so much that you're not sleeping, you're not working well. You might think you are, but you're not. Your brain needs rest to sort through all the information that you gave it during the day. It actually learns and memorizes while you're sleeping. Not only that, but your teachers do not want you to sacrifice your health for your grades. Academic excellence is not exclusive of a healthy heart and body, not by a long shot. In fact, your heart, your mind, and your body have to be in balance. So go get sleep, get your rest, and then take responsibility for making your work up. Your teachers will absolutely understand. We've discussed how education is a holistic endeavor, and at Bear Creek, we want you to be shaped into thriving individuals, unique individuals. When it comes to studying, don't treat yourself like a vending machine, cramming facts into your brain to spit back out and then forget all about them. I tell my drama students to never memorize their lines flatly or in a monotone or in a vacuum. I tell them they have to memorize their lines how they plan to perform them, because they're not just memorizing lines. They're exploring character, they're exploring language, they're exploring story. And in the process of studying those lines, the words on the page, they are really studying and preparing to apply a whole lot more. And this applies to all subjects, not just drama. So how can you set yourself up to study well? Well, first of all, make use of your resources. Use your study guide, if you have one. Use the textbook and any notes that you may have taken. Pick your friends' brains. And lastly, go to your teacher. Try not to go to your teacher first. And some of you may be asking why. Because the endeavor to find the information actually makes you more likely to remember it. You kind of go on a quest to find that information, and the hard work will make you remember it. And also it teaches that ever important skill of self-advocacy, which is something that we really strive for in middle school. Make a study sheet. Be honest with yourself. There's no shame in admitting that you need to study something. That's totally fine. The same thing is true of asking questions. It makes you a better learner, not a worse one. Ask yourself, what am I confident I know? What am I pretty confident I know, but I might need to brush up on? And then what am I confident that I do not know and I need to focus on? When you study, take your time. You wouldn't try to eat an entire cake in one bite, at least I hope you wouldn't. Don't try to review a unit's worth of material in one night. It won't work. Take it bite by bite. And finally, teach someone. The best way to learn something is to teach it. So make yourself the expert on whatever it is you're trying to study. Teach a willing friend or a sibling or a parent or a pet or a stuffed animal. And it will help you to retain that information because you've now become the expert on what it is you're trying to study. We began this evening with Elijah and the ancient past, and I want to conclude at the turn of the century with a word from Dorothy Sayers, who Amy and I both really like. This is from her essay, The Lost Tools of Learning. She says, "For the sole true end of education is simply this, to teach men and women how to learn for themselves." So there's that self-advocacy piece. "And whatever instruction fails to do this is effort spent in vain." So in middle school, we are striving, like the mission says, to enable students to become the individual that God intends. And that means equipping you all with tools to take ownership of your academic journey. So students and parents, I hope that some of this has been helpful to you as you take the next steps of that journey of owning your academic success and taking care of yourselves. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Grace. I really appreciate that. One of the things that I love is when you talk about all the different types of planners, and I must admit I'm that black and white, boring planner. I just write it down, no colors, no special graphics. So there's a place for those of us as well. So I just love hearing you share about all those different ways to, no wrong ways, but lots of right ways to organize content. So thank you for that. We are going to transition into some Q&A time now. If you still have a question that you have not asked yet, you are still welcome to put it in the Q&A chat, but we'll start going through some of the questions that we've already received with our remaining time. So our first question, Amy, I think I'll start with you for this question. We have a parent, and the parent says that at the beginning of the talk, you were sharing about students questioning in these middle school years and having that sort of questioning mindset. So this parent says they get a lot of their student telling us that we're wrong and that the student is unwilling to discuss a different viewpoint. So do you have any suggestions for how to make this situation positive and a learning opportunity versus a point of conflict or tension within the family?
Thanks. That's such a great question. And part of my response will be it really depends on some factors. If it's a 7th or 8th grader or a 5th or 6th grader, I would probably respond differently. If it's a 7th or 8th grader, I would maybe say, go ahead and give them credit for what they think they know. And if they're wrong, you know, and it comes to light later, like maybe they didn't understand a concept or what they were supposed to do on an assignment, then they can take responsibility for that later. But that's sort of that, like, they're ready to be independent and, you know, they do think they know, and maybe they do know because they've been at school. So it probably depends on the situation a little bit more. If it's a 5th or 6th grader, then, you know, sometimes the students are just worried that they're not going to do what the teacher wants them to do and might think their parents don't understand what the teacher wanted them to do. And so I would just push it back to that advocating for yourself and encourage the student to go to the teacher with their specific question about what they're doing. But yeah, this is a hard question, but no formula answer for you with it, although hopefully it's helpful to know that that's a normal and healthy stage for a middle schooler to be in.
Thank you, Amy. Gosh, those questions are the time where I just wish so much we were in person and could have a little dialogue about that question and share a little bit more. The next question for you, Grace, is this parent says that their child often takes breaks when studying, and they're trying to determine what that line is between procrastination versus those brain breaks that you talked about. So how, as a parent, do you support the child, but also keep them on task as needed?
Yeah, I think it has to do a lot with the time and what you're doing during that break. So like I said, if you're taking 2-minute breaks, 3-minute breaks after every single math problem that don't involve, you know, massaging your hand perhaps, or having a drink of water, but it's going off, getting your phone. The 3 minutes turns into 10 minutes, because it would for me. It would definitely turn into a 10-minute break. Knowing taking some of those distractions away, I think, could be really helpful, and making sure that it is a brain break, not a now I'm going to go for 30 minutes after one math problem, but maybe 20 minutes after, or 5 minutes after 20 minutes of work. I think breaking it up, and even asking students to advocate for themselves. Hey, I see you're doing 20 minutes of work here, then let's take 5 minutes, let's set a timer. Another 20 minutes of work, let's set another timer for 5 minutes. I think breaking it up that way could be very helpful.
Thank you so much, Grace. Amy, I'm gonna give this next question to you, and it had to do with that active learning chart that you put up. One of the students noticed that there was something about doodling on that chart, and the student wanted to know, when is it okay to be doodling and when is it not okay? Because sometimes they've been told you shouldn't be doodling in class.
Okay, so the truth is, as teachers, we go back and forth on this all the time, because we even talk as teachers, like we sometimes fiddle with stuff, or you just have, sometimes it's just helpful. And so we understand that doodling can be helpful, but then we notice it can also become a distraction. So it's just that fine line of when is it a distraction and when is it helping you focus. So you and your teacher would have to work that out, because everybody's different. But one of the things that I think is a really good and effective use of doodling is doodling your notes. So I used to have a student that was always writing when I was talking, and I would always think she was writing a note to a friend or doing something she wasn't supposed to do. And then when I'd ask her, she'd say, no, I'm just taking notes on what you say. And so it just helped her pay attention. So maybe even just drawing or doodling in a way that's connected to the lesson, so that it shows that you're using it as a tool to stay focused. So that might be one thing to try, but I would talk to your teacher about it.
Thank you, Amy. That's helpful. Grace, this next question is about planners, so I'll hand it back to you. So this parent says, you mentioned that in 7th and 8th grade that students get to choose their own planners. Do you have any recommendations for some brands or types of planners that might be a good starting point for a student to consider in 7th or 8th grade?
Yeah, for sure. So the way I plan, I love to have a calendar. When I plan out my my plays, there's a lot that goes into it. There's rehearsals that need to be planned. So my preferred way of planning it is if I have a big monthly calendar, so I can see, okay, this is my final due date. This is all the stuff that needs to get done prior to that final due date that I've highlighted. So that's how I like to plan. I think a lot of times for students who will have multiple assignments on different days, it might be helpful to have a weekly spread, so that they can see conceptually how much work they're doing during the week, and even how they can track an assignment that might have been assigned on Monday that's due on Friday throughout the week. So I don't specifically have any brands, but I know that most planner companies will make those options. And some of them even do both, where they have the big monthly calendar in the beginning of the month, and then they break it down by week with big space for you to write day by day. That I find quite helpful. The more space, the better.
Thank you, Grace. I appreciate that. This is the last question that I see coming through so far, but if we have other questions, please continue putting those in the Q&A and we'll get to them. We'll go to this question for now, and Amy, this is for you. So this parent wants to know, this parent says that, my child often might struggle with an assignment and not necessarily ask for help. So how do I as a parent balance wanting my child to take that ownership of asking the teacher, but also recognizing that maybe in this case it sounds like the child is having a hard time doing that for themselves?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it is hard for a lot of students, especially maybe if they're more introverted. So maybe there could be something that is neutral that they would have to go ask the teacher, not like oh, I got a low score and what should I do about it? But just, oh, please check with your teacher on what day your Christmas party is or something that isn't personal. And so it just kind of breaks the ice a little bit. So that might be one idea to break the ice. And then another idea is to, without the student knowing, email the teacher and just say, I'm trying to encourage my child to come talk to you about this or that. And then the teacher can kind of try to help orchestrate a situation where it makes it just a friendly environment for the student to broach the question. And then the teacher can kind of work with the parent on that a little bit.
Thank you, Amy. That's super helpful. I know one thing I share with families as they're exploring Bear Creek is that, like you and Grace have both said, middle school is a time of transition. Kids they're taking that that front seat, but there is still that support. So we want the students to continue to have the support of their parents. Yes, they're in driver's ed, but we want to make sure we're there for them. So I love hearing you discuss some strategies for that. Someone just asked a great question that actually I can answer, which is they popped in a little bit late to the meeting, and will there be a recording? The answer is yes, there will be. For anyone that RSVP'd, and if you're here, you RSVP'd, you will receive a thank you for attending email that will include the link to the recording as well as PowerPoints as well, so that you can have that information and share it if your child was unable to come, or discuss it with them if they were here as well. So we want to provide that resource for you all. I'd love to just wrap us up tonight. First of all, I want to thank Amy and Grace for taking their time to share with us their knowledge and their wisdom around these middle school years. They are both fantastic teachers, and I'm so grateful to both of you. Thank you for taking the time to share your wisdom with us all tonight. I also want to put up on the screen a couple upcoming events that we have. So Tools for Success is a series. So on December 4th, we have our next Tools for Success event called Prepared for the Launch. This is a fantastic event that is really looking ahead towards what happens after Bear Creek. So our upper school leadership team will be in conversation with one another about how we prepare students academically, spiritually, socially, throughout high school for graduating and what's beyond. And then I'm also really excited because we'll have an alumni panel there as well to share about their experience at Bear Creek and how that has helped prepare them for their lives. And then in January, we'll have another great event called Building Resiliency. And this is a fantastic opportunity to really get into some of that social emotional development of children, and thinking through that at all stages of development. And then in January as well, later in the month, we will have Preparing Your Child for Kindergarten. That one is a little bit more specific and focused in. The other two are really welcome anyone to attend. Of course, you're welcome to attend this one as well, but that will be specifically focused for those of our younger families, younger parents who have kids that are getting ready to head into kindergarten. So please join us for any of those events that appeal to you. We would love to see you there. As I mentioned at the very beginning, I am going to stay on this call and share a little bit about admissions. So if you're a prospective family, then please stay on the call. If you are a current family and you don't need to hear about the admissions process, thank you for being here. You are welcome to log off the call now.